I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about unblocking your pathways for life. All of us want to have open pathways. We all want to have the ability to get where we need to go in our lives. And so often our minds keep us from the place where we need to be. In metaphysical philosophy, we say that we live in our minds and not in the world. That means that while we believe so often that we live by the experiences that we have, the things that happen to you and me, the truth is that we live in our minds. The way that we think about circumstances and situations, the way that we think about the things that happen to us in life, really create the environment in which we live. And so we say we live in our minds and not in the world. So often the pathway to our own success, to our happiness, and to our peace is blocked by a variety of things. And today I'd like to talk to you about one of the things that blocks our pathway to understanding and realizing the true potential of our lives, and that is disorganization. Our lives so often are filled with disorganized environments, disorganized houses and rooms, but more importantly, disorganized minds and mental processes. I learned a long time ago that I feel better. I feel better mentally, and I feel better at the center and the core of my being when I am in an environment that doesn't have disorganization, one that is organized and uncluttered, one in which I am able to create within my mind and my heart the ideas and the thoughts that I need to have to deal with the circumstances and situations of life. All of us face a variety of situations in our lives. And remember, as I said a few moments ago, we live in our minds and not in the world. And the way that our mind operates is so often influenced by the environment in which we live. We begin to remove the blocks to the pathways of our lives by surrounding ourselves with environments that are organized and overcoming the disorganization that exists in our lives. The disorganization in a physical sense, the disorganization in a mental sense, the disorganization in a spiritual sense. In order to do that, we need to create space for this reality of organization to take place. We believe in the normal inflow and outflow of circumstances and situations. That means that as things come and as things go, as they come into our life and flow out of our life, we open ourselves to a positive and affirmative life and environment. So if your life is filled with disorganization, if you are in an environment that is disorganized, or if your mental process, the way in which your mind operates, is disorganized, what I invite you to do is to look with me in the next few minutes at ways in which you can unblock the circumstances and situations that keep your pathway from life from being what you want it to be. We begin the process by clearing our consciousness. You know, our minds get cluttered just like our environment gets cluttered. And when the environment's cluttered, it's difficult to know where things are, but it's also difficult to be as creative as we might be. Now, some of us are able to be in an environment of apparent disorganization, but for us it is an organized disorganization. And so if you're one of those people that needs a little clutter around you, don't be concerned about that. But if you are a person who has a lot of clutter in your environment, a lot of clutter in your workspace, and you find yourself mentally being cluttered, being blocked or stopped, if you see disorganization in your thought processes, then maybe one of the things that you should look at is your physical environment, because the physical environment can impact so much the dynamic of the mind and how it operates. Clearing our consciousness and understanding the realization and realizing the connection that we have between the physical, the mental, and the spiritual is key to creating an environment that eliminates disorganization. We need to have organized reality in our physical life, in our mental life, and in our spiritual life. And when we are able to have this sense of organization, this sense of order, then out of those three aspects of our life, we're able to function in a positive and affirmative way. The clutter in your physical life can create clutter in your mind, and the clutter in your mind can create clutter in your emotions, and the clutter in your emotions can create instability and clutter on the spiritual level. And so the importance of clearing out this clutter is tremendously important. A lot of people are fatigued and depressed, and in many cases our fatigue and depression comes from the fact that we are operating in a disorganized environment. Things are out of sync, out of place. In our personal relationships, that happens often. Even in our families, it happens. And in these situations, that disorganization, or what psychologists and sociologists call dysfunctional environments, create so much instability for us that it's tremendously difficult for us to cope, to come up with the ideas and the thoughts and the direction that we need to be guided in the way that we should go. And so the elimination of these things is tremendously important. So if in your life you feel fatigue or depression, if you're tired in body or mind often, then perhaps it's the clutter, perhaps it's the disorganization, perhaps it's the disarray, perhaps it's the busyness of your mind and your environment. All of this creates a drain upon your energy levels, your physical energy and your mental energy. And so when we talk about eliminating the disorganization in your life, we talk about the fact that as you're able to eliminate that disorganization, you're able to stimulate the order that you have in mind, body, and spirit. You're able to create order and enthusiasm and vitality in your energy, and you're able to come to a more peaceful, productive place in your life. One of the greatest sources of creating disorganization in our lives has to do with simply not taking care of the business of daily living that we need to take care of. And that business of daily living, in many cases, resides in our minds as we deal with those things of the past, the things in the present, and the things in the future. One of the things that we say so often in New Thought metaphysical philosophy is that we must always live in the now. Living in the now means being present in this moment. And each time we allow our minds to take us into the past, or we allow our minds to move into the future, we move out of the very precious and magnificent now. And it is only in the now, in the present moment of where you are, that you and I are able to accomplish the things that we need to accomplish. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't think about things that used to happen. Memories are important. Past lessons are important. Past experiences are important. And planning for the future is equally important, and we need to do that. We need to have both of these, past and future, to balance who and what we are. But the majority of our time, and especially our conscious life, should and must be spent in the now. In taking care of business, we talk about taking care of the fact that you are living and residing in the now, that you let go of the baggage of the past, and that you don't spend too much time on the fear or planning of the future, but that you spend time in the present. And in the present moment, you complete the unfinished tasks or the work that you have to do. We believe that the life experience into which we are all born, your life and my life, have brought us here to learn lessons. That each of our experiences, each of our days, each of the opportunities that we have to interact with each other and to come to know each other and ourselves better creates lessons for us that help us in the physical life, in the mental life, and in the spiritual life. But dealing with the reality of being in the present moment and finishing the work and the business about which we are involved right now is of preeminent importance, and we can only be about the business of today, the life that you have right here and right now, if we're present in the moment. A lot of times circumstances and situations present themselves in a way that we would have never expected. A lot of our lives are spent in times of trial and tribulation and difficulty, circumstances and situations that we would not have chosen. But those experiences are ours. We are in the midst of them. And by being in the present moment, we can deal with them. We can deal with illness, with limit, with lack, with challenge, with relationship problems, with our jobs, with our children, with our spouses. We can deal with all of those things only when we're conscious and in the present moment. And so eliminating this disorganization of mind, body, and spirit is tremendously important. All of us know that catching up is no fun. When we're behind all of the time, We are in a situation that is totally and completely disorganized. And so a good part of eliminating the disorganization in our lives has to do with the proper utilization of our time, the realization and understanding that our time is precious. And again, our time is tremendously important in the present moment and being in the midst of this moment. What goes on inside us is more important than what goes on outside of us. Remember, when we began to talk today, we made the statement that we live in our minds and not in the world. And so in living in our minds, it is in our minds that we have to create the elimination of disorganization. It is in our minds that we have to come to points of serenity and peace. It is in our minds that we have to embrace the concept of order. In New Thought philosophy, we talk a lot about divine order. And that speaks to the reality that infinite intelligence, the presence and power of God, creates for all of us divine order. Even though circumstances and situations appear to be in disarray and inharmony, there is divine order undergirding and beneath the surface of what we see. And our challenge is to be able to take hold of that divine order, and in the midst of that divine order, claim for ourselves peace and serenity and guidance and direction. We believe that infinite intelligence guides every one of us, and that if we're able to clear our mind of clutter, if we're able to surround our mind and consciousness with the peace and presence and power of God, of infinite intelligence, that infinite intelligence can and will guide and direct us in the ways that we should go, help us to know what we should know, and support us in our experience of life. I don't know what is blocking your pathway of life. I don't know what challenges you face, but I do know that you and me and all of us are always facing roadblocks in life, and that we're always challenged to overcome those roadblocks. And one of the greatest roadblocks that we need to overcome is disorganization. So I invite you to examine your own life, to look at your environment, physical and mental, and see if disorganization is a problem for you. If it is, there is a way out of your disorganization. And as you move out of that circumstance and situation, you move into a clearer pathway, a more radiant pathway of life that will open you to new vistas and ideas and thoughts and direction that you alone would have never imagined. We believe in prayer and meditation, and so we would like to invite you at this point in the program to pause for us for a moment of quiet reflection. Eternal and loving God, we give you great thanks for your presence. We know that in the midst of physical life, there is disorganization and inharmony, but we see beyond this disorganized reality to your presence of divine order, perfect peace, wholeness, and balance. We open ourselves and are receptive to this presence, and we do this in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
Don't you think that one reason we all become tired, fatigued, and out of sorts is because we try to exert our own will too strongly?
Certainly, yeah. And I think we think that in many cases we're all that there is.
Yeah.
And so we have to rely upon ourselves. And I think so many of us have come to believe this idea of self-reliance, which is tremendously important. And we believe and teach in New Thought metaphysics self-responsibility. But self-responsibility and self-reliance are two different things. And while we rely upon ourselves and while we are responsible for ourselves, there's also an interconnectedness with others as well.
That's a very erudite point. And when we exert our own will, then it's not the same thing, is it?
No, and our will is not always the best.
Yes.
You know, we have a belief that we're always right. I mean, most of us believe that we're always right. And yet more often than not, quite often we do make mistakes and make wrong decisions. And so I think our will must always be tempered with what we would call divine will. And that's an interesting concept that we could do a whole program on, and we have in the past, and that is divine will, or the will of God, isn't something that changes. from time to time. It is constant, and it always calls us and gives us the very best for ourselves and for those around us. And so if we can give up our will to the will of the infinite, then only good can come from it.
Yes, and divine will is for everyone. So our enemies, the people who are doing what we consider to be bad things, the everyone has access to divine will. So it's according to how we use it that makes the difference. And if we can live, not my will, but thine be done, O God, in me and through me, then we've come pretty far. But it's really hard to do that and separate our own little will from the will of God, because how do we know? We have to just really be fair and honest within ourselves and don't judge other people, but judge ourselves only. But we can do that. We can look within ourselves and see, am I exerting my own free will, my own little will, or am I really trying to live the will of God? And if we know that our enemies and the people who we deplore have just the same guidance that we do, it's uh, it gives us pause for thought, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the people with whom we have disagreements or difficulties are the same children of God that we are. And I think that's very difficult for many people to grasp. And one of the things that we talk about so often in this program is we're not talking about anybody changing their religion or changing their spiritual tradition. Everybody is the same, and everybody has equal access to the presence of God, and everyone has equal access to the concepts and ideas that we talk about, and divine order is certainly one of them. And divine order is in alignment with the will of the infinite. And if we are able to align ourselves with that will, which is constant, not changing, it isn't God's will that this happen or that happen. God's will is always the same for all of us, and that's good and only good. Then I think we begin to break down these blocks to our own unhappiness and blocks to our pathway of learning and life, and we're able to overcome the disorganization. And I think so many people are plagued with disorganization at all levels.
Indeed, indeed. But we're not as disorganized sometimes as we might think, because there's divine chaos too. And we have to realize that. We have to realize that not everything is going smoothly and beautifully all the time. We have to have chaos. We have to have, in order to have change. And without change, we had as well not be living.
And that speaks to the point that I made ever so briefly in the talk about the fact that some people work very effectively with a lot of clutter, but other people don't. They're not able to deal with that. But there is an inherent growth process that's in this chaos, as you mentioned, and it's important for us to strike a balance, and that the disorganization that exists sometimes does strengthen us. But as we translate that disorganization from the physical into the mental and into the spiritual, it transcends disorganization into organized harmony of presence.
Yes, and what we consider to be chaotic isn't necessarily clutter, it's just new things entering our lives. A friend called me this morning very upset because his doctor had said he needed to have spinal surgery. Well, he says, I'm not having spinal surgery just yet. I'm going to be thinking about this. And I'm going to be getting other opinions and see what my options are. And that's a way of meeting. To me, that's the right way to meet this chaotic situation that's entered his life. Suddenly, his doctor says he needs spinal surgery. Well, he's going to take it slowly and look at it and get other doctors' opinions. And that's one way, that's one example of how we can change our environment by the way we think. So he's making something sensible out of the chaos that entered his life today.
And it's very important that when we do experience negative times, or if we're in times of turmoil and chaos in our lives, that we do open ourselves to counsel and guidance around us, and don't take necessarily our position as the only position. And the other side, just like in the case of the friend who spoke to you today about the illness, don't accept authority as the ultimate statement, whether it be medical or spiritual or legal or personal. There are no ultimate authorities in life.
Exactly. And from the inner, they're not judgmental. From the inner, they don't exert authority, because they give us total freedom to make our own choices. And as we look within ourselves thoughtfully, then we can come to conclusions because of the divine guidance we're receiving. But sometimes we fool ourselves and say, well, I'm hearing this divine guidance, when actually it's what we want to have happen.
Yes, there's an old saying that there's nothing more fearful than to have a good person getting up off of their knees after praying to do the will of God, because so often the will that they're going to exert is their own and has very little to do with the will or the presence of God.
Very often that would be the case, but we can look for divine guidance and receive it, and we need to know that that guidance is ever present. And if we follow the little voice within us, the divine guidance, then we also have to make our own decisions as we go along as to, did we really hear that? And people receive, I think we receive divine guidance every moment of every day of our lives. It's not just some big event that we get visions from the clouds. It's every day. It's like when we're buying groceries, which do we choose, apples or something else? And which apples do we choose? I think the divine guidance comes down to to things like that. And what are we going to have for breakfast? Whatever our body needs, it'll tell us that that's what we need to have for breakfast. And then we order that or prepare it at home. And that's part of the divine guidance. And the divine guidance is getting rid of the clutter in our lives, as you said so eloquently, so that when the chaos happens that's unavoidable, then we're able to face those things.
And so often the clutter are those three things that I mentioned: the past,
Yes.
and the present, and the future. And in the present moment, so often we have all this unfinished business that we don't take care of, things
Yes.
that we don't like to do or don't want to do. And so we spend our life trying to catch up. Or if we're not catching up in the present moment, then we're damaged by the baggage of the past, or we're fearful of what's happening in the future. And all of that takes away from our peace.
Exactly. And you know, we can let our desks get piled sky high, or we can clean them off. And we can let our computers get filled with rubbish, or we can just be selective in what we put in the hard drive. I think it's so interesting what people save in their computer. Some people save everything. Have you observed that?
Mhm. And I think it has to do also with how people live their lives. And, we know so many people in life that want to hold on to everything.
Mhm.
And that has to do with a lack of the understanding of the law of circulation,
Mhm.
which we touched ever so briefly upon also. But the importance of inflow and outflow, and how that process works and
Yeah.
operates in our lives.
But if we don't let go, then we can't let God.
That's right. And as we let go of things, then other things come in their place. And so it's a very important concept.
Yes. Well, we can listen to what you just said and take it to heart and apply that in every moment of our lives. It makes a difference.
Mhm, mhm. The still small voice, before we get away today, I think we ought to talk about, because in metaphysical philosophy, it is so important to us. And that inner presence, which resides not in us as metaphysicians or New Thought truth students, but resides in everyone's heart. And then that is that indwelling presence of divinity. We call it the indwelling Christ presence, but for those who are not of our tradition, it can be the indwelling presence of God, or for those who don't like the idea of God at all, it can be the infinite spark within us. But
Yes.
it is there within every one of us, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And we can access that anytime we like. We have but to look within to find that truth and to be quiet enough, or just be quiet. And it doesn't have to be extreme, to hear the voice and to hear our inner directives. And that's that's our inner guidance. And there are those on the inner planes who work with us. And we can acknowledge them as being entities, or we can acknowledge them as just being a voice. It doesn't matter how we acknowledge them, as long as we accept the fact that, yes, we do have divine help from the inner plane.
Right. And that help, as you said so well a few minutes ago, comes to us in every day and
Yes.
hundreds of little ways. A
Yes.
lot of times when we talk about the inner voice, or the being still, or being hearing from the voice of God, as people say so often, we think it's a thundering sound. And in fact, for the most part, it is that still small voice that has even no voice to it,
Yes.
and yet it speaks to our heart and our mind.
Yes, that is a very good point, that we expect to hear a voice, but it's not a voice. It's something we sense. It's being sentient as we hear, but it's not exactly hearing. It's just knowing that the inner voice that comes to us. And so some people are clairaudient, some are clairsentient, some are clairvoyant, and some are all three. But if we're just quiet enough and listen, it wouldn't matter what we call it, as long as we listen for that silent voice.
And isn't it interesting that what we call it so often divides us as
Yes,
people? And that's why we're always so cautious of those words, so that people don't get wrapped up in naming something.
yes.
And instead of naming, it's not the name that's important, it's the presence. It's a little bit like people who get so bothered about whether we call what we call God. And it isn't in the name. It is the
Yeah.
name is never important. It is the spirit of what it is.
And living the life. And it doesn't, again, as you said, it doesn't matter what we call living the life. If we live the life, then we're in touch with our inner teachers, we're in touch with the divine, and we can call them guardian angels, entities who have come here to help us. We can call it our own high self, we can call it God speaking to us, and it's all the above, isn't it?
It's all of that and even more. And
Yeah,
one of the things that I notice so much today is agnostics and atheists, which are perfectly fine human beings.
yes.
I don't have a quarrel with them at all. We all have access to the divine, and whether we acknowledge it or not, that doesn't validate or invalidate the presence and the power. It simply means that we all view it in a different way. And so it is open to all of us, and it embraces all of us.
And if I could make a suggestion to our audience, I would just say, be silent for a moment, and I do mean just a moment, and listen to your inner voice, listen to your guidance, listen to those who are helping you from the inner. Just listen, and again, it can be a daily thing, as you just said. It can be every moment to moment activity, but we're living then from the highest aspect of our own being.
Absolutely. And living from the highest aspect of our being is what confident living is about. And Dr. Freelander and I have been sharing with you concepts and ideas about creating organization in your life and embracing the concepts of confident living. We hope that you found this information useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
This program is a community outreach of Christ Church. Dr. Mike Costello speaks each Sunday morning at 11 a.m., and Dr. Iris Freelander speaks on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. at the church. On Sunday evenings at 6 p.m., there is a meditation and healing service. Come and join us. You will be warmly welcomed.